Maria Santos had spent 30 years cleaning office buildings in downtown Chicago. Every night from 10 until 6 in the morning, she pushed her cart through the empty corridors of corporate towers, wiping down desks, vacuuming carpets, and emptying trash bins while the city slept. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing, and her back ached constantly, but she never complained. This was the life she had chosen when she left her small village in Guatemala at 19, seeking a better future for herself and hoping one day to help her family back home. She lived in a small apartment in Pilsen with her daughter Rosa, who was now 16 and studying at the local high school. Rosa was everything to Maria. The girl was smart, curious, and had inherited her grandmother's gift for music. Back in Guatemala, Maria's own mother had been known throughout their village as a woman who could make any instrument sing, though she had never owned anything finer than a battered guitar with 2 missing strings. Maria remembered falling asleep as a child to the sound of her mother's playing, the melodies floating through their tiny house like prayers. When Rosa was 7, Maria had saved for 8 months to buy her daughter a keyboard from a pawn shop. It wasn't much, just a small electric piano with yellowed keys and a crackling speaker, but Rosa had loved it. She taught herself to play using free videos on the library computer, spending hours each day after school practicing while Maria slept before her night shift. By the time Rosa turned 12, she could play songs that made Maria cry, beautiful cascading melodies that reminded her of home and of her mother who had passed away years before. The keyboard had broken 2 years ago. Rosa had been practicing for a school talent show when the power suddenly cut out. They tried everything, checked the batteries, tested different outlets, even took it to a repair shop, but the man there shook his head and said it would cost more to fix than to buy a new one. Maria had promised Rosa they would save up for a replacement, but money was always tight. There was rent, groceries, Rosa's school supplies, and the money Maria sent home to her sister who was raising 3 children alone. Every month, Maria did the math, moving small amounts from one need to another, but there was never enough left over for something as expensive as a proper piano. Rosa stopped asking after a while. She threw herself into her studies instead, telling her mother that it was fine, that she needed to focus on schoolwork anyway if she wanted to get into a good college. But Maria noticed how her daughter's eyes lingered on music stores when they passed them on the bus, how she sometimes hummed melodies while doing homework, her fingers tapping out invisible keys on the kitchen table. The light that used to fill Rosa's face when she played had dimmed, and Maria felt the weight of that loss like a stone in her chest. One evening in late October, Maria arrived at her usual building, a 20-story office tower that housed a consulting firm on the upper floors. She began her routine on the ground floor as always, working her way through the lobby and the conference rooms. When she reached the 15th floor, she noticed something different. The large corner office that usually belonged to one of the senior partners had been cleared out. The desk was gone, the bookshelves empty, and in the center of the room sat a grand piano. Maria stood in the doorway, her cleaning cart forgotten behind her. She had seen pianos before, of course, in hotel lobbies and concert halls she had cleaned over the years, but never one like this. It was enormous, black and glossy, catching the light from the city outside the windows. She stepped closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. The wood was smooth under her fingertips when she reached out to touch it. She walked around it slowly, taking in the perfect curves, the gold lettering spelling out the maker's name, the keys that gleamed white and black in the dim office lighting. She shouldn't be taking this much time. She had 12 more floors to clean before morning, but something about the piano held her there. She thought of her mother, of those long-ago evenings filled with music. She thought of Rosa, of the joy that had left her daughter's life when the keyboard died. Without quite meaning to, Maria pulled out the bench and sat down. Her hands hovered over the keys. She had never played an instrument in her life. Her mother had tried to teach her once, but Maria had been impatient, more interested in running outside with her friends than sitting still for lessons. She had always regretted that. Now, sitting at this beautiful piano, she felt an ache of longing for something she had never had, for a skill she had never learned, for music she could never make. She pressed one key very gently. The note rang out clear and pure, filling the empty office with sound. It was beautiful, more beautiful than anything that had come from Rosa's little keyboard. Maria pressed another key, then another, creating a random pattern of notes that meant nothing but somehow meant everything. She wasn't making music, just touching the keys and listening to each perfect tone fade into silence before trying the next one. Maria pulled her hand back quickly, suddenly aware of what she was doing. This piano didn't belong to her. She was here to clean, not to touch expensive instruments that probably cost more than she earned in several years. She stood up from the bench, smoothing down her work uniform, and returned to her cart in the hallway. But as she cleaned the rest of that floor, she kept glancing back at the piano through the open door, drawn to it in a way she couldn't explain. The next night, the piano was still there. Maria finished cleaning the other offices on the 15th floor first, saving that corner room for last. When she finally entered, she told herself she would just clean around it, dust the top carefully, and move on. But once again, she found herself sitting on the bench, her rough cleaning gloves removed and set aside. This time she pressed several keys together, creating a chord that resonated through the room. The sound was so rich, so full, that it seemed impossible it came from just one instrument. She began coming to the piano every night. Just for a few minutes, she told herself, just to hear a few notes before finishing her work. She never tried to play actual songs because she didn't know how. Instead, she simply explored the keyboard, learning which notes sounded good together, which ones created tension, which ones resolved it. Her breaks got a little longer each night. 5 minutes became 10, then 15, then 20. She started arriving at that floor earlier, rushing through the other offices so she would have more time with the piano. 3 weeks after the piano appeared, Maria arrived at work to find a note taped to her cart. Her supervisor wanted to see her in the morning before she left. Maria's heart sank. Someone must have seen her on the security cameras, wasting time, touching things that didn't belong to her. She would be fired, and then how would she pay rent? How would she support Rosa? How would she send money home? She barely slept that day, lying in bed running through apologies and explanations, trying to figure out what she would say. When she met with her supervisor the next morning, her hands were shaking, but Mr. Peterson didn't look angry. He looked curious, almost amused. He pulled up a video on his computer and turned the screen toward her. There she was, sitting at the piano in the empty office, her cleaning uniform stark against the elegant instrument. But she wasn't just pressing random keys as she had thought. Somehow, over those weeks of exploration, she had created something that resembled music. Simple, halting, full of mistakes, but unmistakably a melody. Mr. Peterson explained that the consulting firm was moving out at the end of the month. One of the partners was a piano enthusiast who had brought his personal instrument to the office years ago, but had decided it was too much trouble to move it to the new location. He was planning to sell it. However, someone on the night security team had noticed Maria on the cameras and mentioned it to the partner. The partner had started watching the footage himself, fascinated by this cleaning woman who came every night to teach herself piano. What happened next seemed impossible to Maria, like something from a dream. The partner wanted to meet her. His name was Mr. David Chen, and he arrived at the building that evening, an hour after Maria's shift began. He was a short man with gray hair and kind eyes, probably in his 60s. He asked her about herself, about why she came to the piano every night. Maria's English failed her several times as she tried to explain about her mother, about Rosa, about the broken keyboard, and the music that had left their home. Mr. Chen listened to everything. Then he asked her to play something, anything at all. Maria's face burned with embarrassment. She tried to explain that she didn't really play, that she just touched the keys, that she had never learned properly. But he insisted, gently, so she sat down at the piano and recreated the simple melody she had been working on, the one that had appeared accidentally from her nightly experiments. Her hands trembled and she hit wrong notes, but she made it through. When she finished, Mr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then he told her something that changed everything. He said the piano was meant to bring joy, and clearly it had brought her joy. He said his daughter had taken lessons for 10 years and never once played with the kind of feeling he had seen in those security videos, the pure discovery and wonder that Maria showed every night. He had already made his decision. The piano was hers if she wanted it. Maria couldn't understand at first. She thought he meant she could keep playing it here in the office until the firm moved out. But no, he meant the piano itself, the entire instrument, was hers to keep. He would arrange to have it moved wherever she wanted. All he asked was that she continue playing, continue exploring, and maybe one day let him know how the story turned out. Maria started crying right there in the office, tears streaming down her face as she tried to thank him in her broken English. Mr. Chen just smiled and shook her hand, telling her that some things were meant to happen, and this piano had clearly been waiting for her. The logistics seemed impossible at first. Maria's apartment was tiny, up 3 flights of narrow stairs in an old building. There was nowhere to put a grand piano, but Mr. Chen had thought of that too. He knew someone who ran a community center in Pilsen, just 4 blocks from where Maria lived. The center had a large room used for events and meetings, but it sat empty most evenings. Mr. Chen made a phone call, had a conversation in rapid English that Maria couldn't follow, and within an hour it was arranged. The piano would be moved to the community center, and Maria would have access to it whenever she wanted. In exchange, she would keep it maintained and allow it to be used for community events. 2 weeks later, on a cold Saturday in November, the piano arrived at the Pilsen Community Center. Maria had told Rosa they were going to help at a community event, nothing more, wanting it to be a surprise. When they walked into the large room and Rosa saw the grand piano sitting in the center, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, she stopped in her tracks. Maria explained everything, the words tumbling out, about the nights she had spent teaching herself, about Mr. Chen's incredible generosity, about how this piano was theirs now, in a way, theirs to play whenever they wanted. Rosa approached the piano like it was something sacred. She sat down at the bench, her hands hovering over the keys exactly as her mother's had that first night. Then she began to play. It had been 2 years since she had touched a real instrument, but her fingers remembered. She played a piece by Chopin that she had learned from online videos years ago, and the sound that came from the piano filled the entire room, spilling out into the hallway, drawing people from other parts of the center to come and listen. Maria stood behind her daughter, watching Rosa's face transform as she played. The light was back, that spark that had been missing for 2 years. Other people gathered in the doorway, neighbors from the community, families Maria recognized from the neighborhood. They stood quietly, listening to this teenage girl play Chopin on a grand piano in a community center in Pilsen. And something magical was happening that none of them fully understood yet. When Rosa finished, there was a moment of silence, and then everyone began clapping. An elderly woman approached, introducing herself as Mrs. Alvarez. She used to teach piano, she said, back in Mexico before she came to Chicago. She had been looking for students for a reason to teach again. Would Rosa be interested in lessons? She couldn't pay much, Maria started to say, but Mrs. Alvarez waved her hand dismissively. They could work something out, she said. Maybe Maria could help clean Mrs. Alvarez's apartment once a week in exchange. Over the next month, something unexpected grew around the piano. Rosa started taking lessons with Mrs. Alvarez twice a week, and her playing improved rapidly. Word spread through the neighborhood about the beautiful piano at the community center. Other people started coming to play it. A young man named Marcus, who worked at the grocery store, came in the evenings to practice jazz. A middle-aged woman named Lin played traditional Chinese songs that reminded her of her childhood. The community center director, seeing the interest, started organizing informal concerts on Friday evenings. Maria continued working her night shift, but now she rushed home in the mornings to sleep so she could wake up in the afternoon and practice. Mrs. Alvarez, hearing about Maria's interest, offered to teach her too. Maria protested that she was too old, that her fingers were too stiff from years of cleaning, but Mrs. Alvarez insisted. And so Maria began learning properly, starting with the basics she should have learned as a child. It was hard. Her fingers didn't move the way Rosa's did. She struggled with rhythm and reading music. There were days when she felt ridiculous, a 50-year-old cleaning woman trying to learn piano like a child. But Mrs. Alvarez was patient, and slowly, very slowly, Maria began to improve. The random melodies she had created in the office became real songs. Simple ones at first, children's songs and folk tunes, but songs nonetheless. The community center started promoting the Friday evening concerts more actively. They put up flyers, posted on social media, invited local newspapers to cover the events. The story of how the piano came to be there, about Maria and Mr. Chen and Rosa, spread through Chicago's immigrant communities. People saw in it something they recognized, the unexpected kindness of strangers, the way beauty could appear in the middle of ordinary struggle. By spring, the Friday concerts were drawing crowds of 50 or 60 people. Rosa played regularly, her repertoire expanding as Mrs. Alvarez pushed her to try more difficult pieces. Marcus played his jazz improvisations that made people snap their fingers and sway. Lin played her Chinese folk songs. And sometimes, though not often, Maria played too. Just simple pieces, nothing fancy, but played with a feeling that came from somewhere deep inside her, from memories of her mother and her village, and all the years of hard work that had led her to this unlikely moment. One Friday in April, Mr. Chen came to the community center. Maria hadn't seen him since the day the piano was delivered. He slipped in during the middle of the concert and sat in the back row, listening as Rosa played a Beethoven sonata that would have been impossible for her 2 years ago. When the concert ended and people were gathering for coffee and pan dulce that someone had brought, Maria saw him and rushed over, thanking him again, trying to explain what his gift had meant. Mr. Chen listened to her halting explanation, then told her something she would never forget. He said that for years he had owned that piano but rarely played it, keeping it in his office like a status symbol, something to impress clients. It had been beautiful but silent, wasted. Now it was doing what pianos were meant to do, bringing music into the world, bringing people together. He was the one who should be grateful, he said, because she had taught him something important about generosity and purpose. The community center director approached them with an idea. The center was planning a big fundraiser concert in June. Would Rosa consider being one of the featured performers? And maybe, she added, looking at Maria, maybe Maria would play something too. They could tell the story of the piano, of how it came to be here, and use the event to raise money for music education programs in the neighborhood. Maria's first instinct was to say no. She wasn't good enough to perform in front of a real audience, but Rosa grabbed her hand, squeezing it tight, her eyes pleading. Mrs. Alvarez chimed in, saying Maria was more ready than she thought. Even Mr. Chen encouraged her, saying he would love to hear her play. Finally, feeling cornered but also strangely excited, Maria agreed. The next 2 months were a blur of practice. Maria cut back on overtime at work so she could spend more time at the piano. Rosa helped her mother learn a piece by a Guatemalan composer, a simple but beautiful melody that reminded Maria of her village. Mrs. Alvarez worked with both of them, preparing them for the performance. Maria's hands still cramped and her fingers still stumbled over difficult passages, but slowly the piece began to take shape. The night of the concert arrived in mid-June. The community center had transformed its large room into a proper performance space, with rows of folding chairs facing the piano, lights set up to illuminate the performer, and a small stage area. More than 200 people had bought tickets, far more than anyone expected. The local Spanish-language newspaper sent a reporter. A classical music blogger from downtown Chicago came out of curiosity after seeing something about it online. Maria stood backstage, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might faint. She was wearing a dress Rosa had helped her pick out, simple and blue, the nicest thing she owned. Her hands were shaking. Rosa, who was performing in the second half, tried to calm her mother down, but Maria couldn't stop thinking about all the ways she might fail, all the mistakes she might make in front of all these people. The concert began with Marcus playing jazz, his confident fingers dancing across the keys. Then Lynn played her Chinese folk songs, beautiful and melancholy. There were other performers too, teenagers from the neighborhood who had started coming to the community center to practice. Each one was better than Maria, more skilled, more polished. Maria's panic grew with each performance. Then it was her turn. The director introduced her, telling the story of how she had found the piano in the office where she cleaned, how she had taught herself to play in stolen moments during her night shift, how Mr. Chen's generosity had brought the piano here. People applauded before she even played a note. Maria walked to the piano on legs that felt like they might give out. She sat down at the bench, the same bench where she had sat hundreds of times over the past 8 months. She placed her rough, work-worn hands on the keys, the same keys she had first touched that night in the empty office. She took a breath and she began to play. The first few notes were shaky. Her fingers felt thick and clumsy. She hit a wrong note in the third measure and her heart lurched. But she kept going, pushing through her fear, and gradually something shifted. The piece began to flow. She stopped thinking about the audience, about making mistakes, about whether she was good enough. She thought instead about her mother in Guatemala playing that broken guitar. She thought about Rosa and the light in her daughter's eyes when she played. She thought about all the years of cleaning offices in the dark and how this piano had brought unexpected beauty into her life. The music poured out of her, simple and honest, filled with longing and hope and gratitude. It wasn't perfect. She made several more mistakes, small stumbles that a trained musician would notice. But there was something in her playing that transcended technique, a raw emotional truth that reached the audience in a way that polish and perfection might not have. When she finished, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the entire room erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Maria looked out at the audience through tears and saw Rosa in the front row, crying and smiling and clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. She saw Mr. Chen standing in the back, nodding with satisfaction. She saw her neighbors, her community, all these people who had supported her and believed in her. Rosa performed later in the concert, playing a challenging Rachmaninoff piece that brought down the house. But afterward, everyone wanted to talk to Maria. People came up to her, shaking her hand, telling her how moved they were by her performance, by her story. The reporter from the Spanish newspaper interviewed her, asking about her journey from Guatemala to Chicago, from cleaning offices to playing piano. In the weeks after the concert, something unexpected happened. The story got picked up by larger news outlets. A feature appeared in the Chicago Tribune about Maria and the piano. A local television station did a segment for their evening news. Suddenly, Maria's story was everywhere, shared on social media, discussed in online forums, held up as an example of the power of art and generosity and community. The attention was overwhelming and sometimes uncomfortable. Maria wasn't looking to be famous. She just wanted to play piano and support her daughter and do her work. But the story had touched something in people, especially in other immigrants and working-class families who saw their own struggles and dreams reflected in Maria's journey. The fundraiser concert had raised enough money to start a small scholarship program for music students in the neighborhood who couldn't afford lessons. Mrs. Alvarez took on 3 new students, teaching them at the community center. The Friday evening concerts became a regular institution, drawing bigger crowds, featuring more diverse performers. The piano that had once sat silent in Mr. Chen's office was now the beating heart of a growing music community. Rosa received a full scholarship to a prestigious music program at Northwestern University, starting that fall. When the letter arrived, mother and daughter held each other and cried, overwhelmed by how much their lives had changed in less than a year. Maria thought about the broken keyboard that had started everything, about the random chance that had put that piano in the office where she worked, about Mr. Chen's unexpected generosity, about all the tiny moments that had built to this. On Rosa's last Friday before leaving for university, they played a duet together at the community concert. Mrs. Alvarez had arranged a simple piece that they could play together, their four hands moving across the keyboard in harmony. It wasn't the most complex music that had been played on that piano, but it might have been the most meaningful. A mother and daughter, brought together by music, playing side by side in front of a community that had embraced them both. After the concert, after the applause died down and people were leaving, Maria sat alone at the piano for a few minutes. She thought about that first night when she had pressed a single key just to hear the sound it made. She had been so afraid then, afraid of being caught, afraid of touching something that didn't belong to her. Now this piano felt like it had always belonged to her, or maybe she had always belonged to it. She played her Guatemalan piece one more time softly just for herself. Through the windows of the community center she could see the lights of Chicago, the city that had challenged her and sheltered her, and finally given her this unexpected gift. Her hands moved across the keys, no longer rough and uncertain but growing more confident with each passing day. She was still a cleaning woman, still working nights to support her family, still sending money home to Guatemala. But she was also, impossibly and wonderfully, a pianist. The story of Maria and her piano spread far beyond Chicago, becoming one of those tales that people share when they need to believe in kindness and possibility. Mr. Chen was interviewed by several publications, and he always said the same thing, that giving away the piano was the best decision he had ever made. Maria continued to clean offices at night and practice piano during the day, her two lives existing side by side, each one making the other more meaningful. Years later, people would still come to the Pilsen Community Center to see the piano and hear the Friday concerts. Rosa would come home from university during breaks and perform, her skills having grown far beyond what anyone imagined that day she first sat at the piano. And Maria would still be there, still playing, still learning, still discovering new melodies in the keys of an instrument that had found its way to her through a combination of chance and grace, and the kind of generosity that changes lives in ways both small and profound. Sonnet 4-5.